Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we have a very special show. We're going to bring in a person who should have no introduction. He's the co-author of the book, The Millionaire Next Door, and also an author of the book, Richer Than a Millionaire. But rather than me do an introduction, I have someone else who's going to go ahead and do the introduction for him. So we'll just watch his introduction in a minute.
Hi, I'm Nathan Osmond, singer, songwriter, motivational speaker, and even mortgage loan officer. I've known Dr. Bill Danko for over 20 years, and we've shared the stage at many great financial conferences the world over. Just recently, Dr. Bill Danko did a great Zoom call for my sales associates and shared some great principles from his New York Times longest best-selling list, The Millionaire Next Door, but also what it means to be richer than a millionaire. This is his new book, and I highly recommend it. The entire team at the Elite Team was very appreciative of Dr. Bill Danko's time and his insights, as he's a speaker that speaks with conviction from the heart. In fact, we ordered over 100 different copies of this book to give to our clients and our associates because we truly believe that by studying this book, it can really help you to get through these turbulent times. This book is solid with research and survey research and empirical evidence that helps you to understand that yes, money is important, but money plus happiness is even better. I highly recommend that you go get a copy of this book today. You won't regret it.
And with that great introduction from someone else other than myself, we're going to now bring in the Honorable William Danko. Bill, welcome to the show.
Nick, thank you.
You
what
like
a great
that,
job.
And I still have the book too,
I-
Richer Than a Millionaire.
I appreciate that. The more the better.
Yeah. So, we're going to be talking today about fiscal responsibility, which is a highlight of a theme that we're looking at with David M. Walker, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. So when David joins us, I don't think that commission has ever been formed, and I don't think anybody in Washington, D.C. is even in tune to fiscal responsibility. But before we get into that, we're going to bring in some of our panelists. One of our friends who's also a CPA, Lee Newton Rhodes, has joined us. Lee,
good morning
to the program. And also another person, assuming he's not busy putting up all of our shows on Spotify and iHeartRadio. We're going to bring in the Honorable Mark Lee also into the show. And Shaquille Latmer from Australia will also be joining us as well later on, along with the Honorable David M. Walker. But Bill, what are your thoughts about this? I like this book, The Millionaire Next Door, because it tells people a lot about being fiscally responsible, but also richer than a millionaire. In other words, that just money is something that you can never have enough of, but at the same time, it's not the end all in life. So tell us a little bit about this book because it's relatively new, and the other book. I'd like to hear more about it from the person who wrote it. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, both books are based on empirical evidence. As a professor, we gather the data and then determine where it brings us. And in Richer Than a Millionaire, we looked at the idea of, okay, you have this high net worth, but are you happy? Well, there's a psychological construct called subjective well-being, SWB, by Professor Ed Diener, who created this maybe 20 years ago. But this construct is an easy-to-implement survey instrument to determine how well adjusted you are. And the higher you score on this particular scale, the more well adjusted or therefore happy and content you are with your life. Well, one thing we found that all wealthy people are not happy. Fortunately, the majority are. But we look at that subset of the discontent, the malcontent, and we contrast and compare them with those who are well adjusted. And what we find is that the correlate to happiness is to be a giver instead of a taker, right? To be generous with your time, talent, treasure, be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. And so when I look at this the fiscal irresponsibility in the United States right now, not only on the governmental level, but certainly on the personal level. I find it refreshing when we have things in the legislation that say, okay, look, we have to have some work elements on these giveaway programs. Yes, I'm all in favor of helping the down and out, no question, but let's have a little bit of effort if you're able to do it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's one of the provisions in the law that the president just signed this past Saturday. It's really refreshing.
Hey, William, quick question for you and everything, because I know that I've had the pleasure of doing a couple of shows here and had a number of guests. And one of the things that they talk about is sometimes when folks get a tremendous amount of money, they like to get their new toys, and sometimes those new toys can be expensive new toys. So there have been a lot of folks that are going, how frugal is it if you are a billionaire that you decide to, purchase $1 billion or $1 million, or however much they cost, spaceship, and go and then decide to travel into Mars or the moon or a number of things like that. So I just wondered your thoughts, because I know a lot of people are frustrated because they're going like, there's this new space race, and it's not even between countries, it's between these rich folks that are having this contest with their toys, kind of like the way they used to have contests with their cars. Now they're having a contest with their bigger toys.
Mark, you got to realize, worldwide there are fewer than 2,000 billionaires, okay, and 8 billion people on this good earth. And so when we look at those on the very top of the spectrum, there is some behavior that seems frivolous. It just seems, but what my research is about is ordinary millionaires. Look, here's the deal. In the United States, the median net worth, the 50th percentile, is about $120,000 per household.
Okay.
It's not a lot, but to be in the top 10%, that'll get you into the millionaire category. And that's just, and what is $1 million of investable assets all about at 4% a year? That's an assured income of maybe $40,000. You're hardly rolling in it. And so by and large, the millionaire population, of which we have probably 10, 15 million millionaires in the United States right now with investable assets of $1 million or more, they're doing okay.
Right.
They're pretty self-sufficient, but they're not ready for the space race. I'll tell you that.
Right.
And along those same lines, how much responsibility do you think it is for those select few to reach out and try to share some of their wealth? Maybe not so much redistribution, because I'm not saying that, but to kind of like help those that are fortunate. Because one of the greatest millionaires of all times in my mind was Rockefeller, and Rockefeller definitely had a history of going out into the community and actually sharing some of his wealth. I think there was a story of him literally walking down the streets of maybe New York and other places and handing out dollar bills and other things, and even sometimes I think giving items to kind of show that he wasn't just a millionaire of himself and of his family, but that he was willing to share and to give some of his wealth to encourage others to make it as well. But that's just kind of
and certainly Andrew Carnegie had that same philosophy, and the legacy lives on. But currently, I mean, look, we have Buffett, who takes the billionaire's pledge or whatever it's called, saying, I'm going to give away most of my net worth before I die. And Bill Gates has that same attitude. So, I mean, there are some wealthy people who I think are doing something responsible, saying, I can't take it with me. One of my favorite millionaires I saw at an endowment presentation, he was in his 80s. And the reason he said, I was making this donation to the university at this time is because, quite frankly, there are no pockets in burial shrouds.
It's interesting you say that, because that's actually the line from a blues song. I wish I could think of the blues singer, even though I am a somewhat blues scholar. But one of the lines within this blues song is, I've yet to see an armored car at a funeral yet. So that is a line within a relatively well-known blues song.
I just got a comment. We're talking about money and happiness. Happiness and a happy life can be very fleeting in terms of businesses going sour or relationships going sour. Is it more important to have a meaningful life than a happy life?
Well, but having a meaningful life, I think, is absolutely critical. But that leads to happiness. You know, there's in Man's Search for Meaning, with the book by Viktor Frankl, the Auschwitz
Excellent book.
survivor. Yeah, the Auschwitz survivor. He says, you cannot pursue happiness; it has to ensue, and it only comes about as how much you give into your life mission, and how you're helping others, and then the rewards come, not only financially but also in terms of the gratitude that you feel and the others feel. So yeah, it's so yeah, money is not the end all, but boy,
Yeah.
Happiness
Happiness takes place as you give more service to other people, and that's my philosophy too, Bill. But then we always have people have a contra philosophy, and we brought him in from Australia. He's the president of Pacific Rim Council down under, Shaquille Latimer. So I'd like to hear from Shaquille. What is your thoughts about being richer than a millionaire by giving as opposed to taking all the time, which I know you're an expert at?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Well. Firstly, I don't want to. My comments are mine. They're not representative of the Business Council or any other organisation that I'm part of. But look, we voted across the world to have taxes, specifically so that we could help the poorest people in our countries. So if the government takes our money and pisses it up against the wall, and then you come back to me and say, "Oh, look, the Children's Hospital needs more equipment." What a cop-out. If the Children's Hospital needs more equipment, the government needs to say, "Look, guys, we need to raise taxes." And then the people get to say, "Why do you need to raise taxes? Why does the Children's Hospital need more equipment?" Because if you have been entrusted with our money and you've pissed it up against the wall, that's on you. We need new government. What we don't need to do is to bully and harass the wealthiest people in our society and make out that all they do is take. Now, first of all, the money that I have got, I didn't take from anybody, Nick. I earned it. Okay, it's mine. I earned it. And whatever moral pleasure I get from giving it to charity or supporting causes I care about is up to me. I don't need anyone else to tell me what to do with it. Secondly, is it just me, or does it kind of sound like bullshit when the wealthiest people on the planet say, "We're going to give it all away"? Like what? You hate your children? What's the story here? You've sacrificed so many hours in your life that you haven't spent with your kids. Your kids have been, brought up by nannies and all that, and now you're actually going to deny them all of this wealth? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Very interesting that during COVID, all of these foundations that these billionaires have put all their money into, they didn't increase the minimum amount that they had to spend. They've only got to give 5% a year away, and they earn more than 5% a year on their investments. So did they all of a sudden say, "Well, look, the rainy day has arrived. We're going to start giving away 20% during this COVID period"? No, not at all. And all of us know, who specialize in taxes and financial structures, that these assets can grow tax-free for generations. But if they ever want to take the assets out, they can, and they just have to pay the final tax on it. So, this is just structuring and tax tricks. Don't be deluded into thinking the wealthiest people on earth make hundreds of billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars and then wake up one day and go, "Well, you know what I should do? I should give it all away." No, I don't believe it. I think they're all full of crap.
Okay, well, respond to Shaquille for a second.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
All right, here's a book by Professor Arthur Brooks, American Enterprise Institute. He's in a think tank. Anyway, but he makes the point in this empirically based book that it's not about governments giving it away. It's about individual philanthropy that makes the most impact. Because you're right, Shaquille. The government often misdirects money in an unfortunate way. Now, I remember a Forbes article, an interview with Bill Gates, when he was asked how much money his children will be getting from his vast fortune. And at the time, he said they're only going to get $10 million each. I don't want to spoil them. So he's not going to make the kids billionaires, but he's certainly not going to let them be destitute either. So, I mean, in fact, if you get too profligate, you are going to ruin the kid's life. They have no motivation to achieve on their own. So it's not deprivation. It's called motivation.
Well, I understand. I understand this idea, and I get it. And I know that the what do they call themselves, the good club or whatever, all the billionaires promise to give all this money away. I'm not trying to suggest that $10 million is nothing, but $10 million is not that much. You know, you're not going to be living a lifestyle where you can afford to fly on private jets and have yachts and all that. In the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trials, these guys like he spends like $2 or $3 million a year just to maintain the lifestyle that he has. So you're going to give your kids $10 million when you're one of the richest people on earth? You are depriving your kids because you've dangled a carrot in front of them their whole lives. Their entire lives, they've lived in mansions, they've gone to these great schools. They've had everything they could possibly want. And now all of a sudden you're going to give them an amount of money which doesn't allow them to maintain the lifestyle that you as a parent have dangled in front of them their whole lives. I can't imagine wanting to do that to my children. That's a horrible thing.
I'll bring my violins out for
Well,
Bill Gates'
but we
children.
talk now. Hang on just a moment. Let's talk about this in relative terms. We talk about today, and David M. Walker and I will often discuss the differences between generations. Okay, a lot of young people today and the millennials are talking about how hard it is to have the lifestyle that their parents had. Okay, but if you were to go back 200 years, the lifestyles that are held by the poorest people in our countries would be enviable to the people that lived 200 years ago, would be enviable to the 2/3 of the world's population that doesn't have enough to eat. So do we just say the same thing? I'll bring out the violins. No, we all generally would like our children to have at least as good a life as what we've had. And the idea that you're going to give the money away when you've already paid your taxes and deprive your kids for the sole purpose of making sure that your kids aren't spoiled, I don't get it, and I certainly will not. If God ever blesses me with children, I certainly won't do that to my
Bill
kids.
and
Okay, we're going to shift a minute. We want to bring in David Walker, who brought up the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, speaking about children and grandchildren having a better life. If we don't get our house in order, they're not going to have any life. So, David, what is the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, or is the media and everybody going to drop it since McCarthy and Biden agreed to this debt extension, and everything's going to just die until it reappears itself? So what about the fiscal responsibility?
Right before I get into that, let me comment on what I think you were talking about.
Sure.
For the first time in the history of the United States, 78% of Americans believe that life for their kids and grandkids will not be as good as theirs. That is un-American. For every generation seeks to try to be able to provide a better life for their kids. Now, you also have to understand the issue of the word enough. Once you have enough, then you don't need to continue to try to get more money just to be able to keep score. You want to be able to give your kids something where they can be reasonably comfortable, but they have to work. They have to do something to be productive, okay? And so there's a balance, if you will. And I know I myself, there are a number of charities that I'm going to give money to because I am going to leave something to my kids. I'm not in a situation where I'm wealthy or ever will be. I'm very comfortable, but I'll never be wealthy because I spend most of my life doing public service. And you don't get paid a lot of money in public service if you're honest, and I can assure you I'm honest. Okay.
No, David,
Are you saying all those? Are you saying all those rich politicians are not honest, or have you just been doing something wrong, Dave?
I'm saying I'd like to find out how they got their money. Okay, we'll just leave it at that because I know what they get paid. Okay,
Right.
All right, now
David,
let's transition.
I have to leave early, but I'm going to try to continue in the car on my way over. But my question is, why is it that we continue to? I mean, Fareed Zakaria about 2 weeks ago said that still America is 4% of the world's population, but we produce about 25% of GDP growth globally. So is it the fact that our economy just continues to be stronger than other economies and we just can keep saying we can afford to do this? I mean, at what point does it just become too much? Or is the damage you're saying already being done by future, that we're actually able to continue to incur debt, print more money, but, when are we going to really feel the brunt of this? I mean, it's just that we do this every year.
Well, first you have to look at metrics, okay? Debt to GDP, when you count total debt, which is debt that we owe to the public and debt that we owe to the trust funds, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, we're at a historic high. It's never been higher than now. And unlike at the end of World War II, where we were going down on debt to GDP, we're doing exactly the opposite. And the latest bill, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, makes a modest, underline the word modest, reduction in the projected imbalance. All right. I mean, I would have voted for it because it beats the alternative. But the real question is, where are we going from here? And there's two things that we need from here. Number one, we need a constitutional fiscal responsibility amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy this country can take on absent extraordinary circumstances, that seeks to get us to a lower level of debt to GDP within about 10 to 12 years. And there are actions that are being taken to try to get that done. I just came off a call with leaders from a state out west. I've got a state in the east that talking about bringing suit against the Congress for failure to call a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, which should have been called as far back as 1979. I won't go there unless you have questions. The second thing that has to be done is you have to realize that we're in such a deep hole, and that hole's getting deeper and deeper, and time is working against us, that the idea that you're going to make the kind of choices on reforming social insurance programs, reprioritizing and reducing discretionary spending, including defense, engaging in comprehensive tax reform that also generates more revenues as a percentage of GDP, the idea that you're going to do that through the regular order in a reasonable period of time is not going to happen. And so therefore, we're going to have some type of a special commission that engages the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicit their input, makes recommendations where everything's on the table for a guaranteed up or down vote. And I'm working with leaders in the Congress now to try to help make that a reality. Those are the two things you're going to have in order for us to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability, and in order to make a dent in the opportunities to try to make sure that our kids and grandkids, and that's who I'm worried about, not my kids, my grandkids, that they have the opportunity to have a better life than we do.
Hey, Dave,
I think you've currently already got 20 states, haven't you, that are calling for that convention. So
we had
I'm not
30,
sure what
39 in 1979, 40 in 1983. You only need 34.
Well, this is very scary. I hope that we can.
And you need 35 to.
You
need 35 to actually make the amendments. But right now, I think that the numbers are at 38 to ratify.
Right.
So I don't see. Look, I think the United States is at some point going to be forced to tackle this, because you're right in that they're not going to do it by choice. I think with the strength of the BRICS nation and a potential decoupling of the petrodollar, or a potential change in the US's reserve currency status, is going to force the United States to make some really, really tough choices. And this financial irresponsibility in the United States, really, it is unfair on the rest of the world, because the rest of the world had agreed to use the US currency as its reserve, and it's been inflated away, and its value has been frittered away over things that are not necessarily in the interests of the world that is entrusted their labor profits in the US dollar. So I think the US has an obligation to do something. It's very interesting. More domestically, you said the 78%. I sounded the alarm on this a couple of years ago in France, where 96% of people said that they didn't think their children or their grandchildren would have as good a lifestyle as them. And we're seeing similar numbers around the world. We have to do something. It's not fair on the next generations for us to make changes now that are just going to help us for the next 10 or 20 years and kick the. If I just had a power failure, what's just happened to my room? Kick the can down another 30 or 40 years.
You didn't pay the
maybe they're kicking me out of my. I'll just mute me for a little while. Sorry, I don't know what happened
problem. Hey, Dave and Bill, one of the questions I had that I was curious about, and I think that Shaquille was kind of alluding to it, because I hear, and I've heard those statistics as well. Don't have any kids of my own, but I do have those 2 nephews and everything. But I know in our family, we definitely have a history of knowing not just our financial situation, and I know the billionaires and billionaires definitely make sure that their financial situation is known, but there's also land wealth and wealth in things that are of value in your house and everything. So I was wondering, is that conversations that we're not seeing enough of? I know that Nick oftentimes talks about fiscal literacy and that kind of conversation. I don't know that enough of us know enough about generational wealth. We hear the conversation about generational wealth, even in the minority communities, but I don't know that enough of us actually have an understanding of what that means. Like, I know that in my case, we have land and we also have timber and houses on that property, and that is part of the wealth conversation. But I don't know that enough people are aware of those situations or even make contingency plans for those situations.
I'll mention something quickly, and then Bill Danko may want to comment since he's written on a lot of these issues. For most Americans, the biggest part of their net worth is home equity.
Exactly.
All right? And most Americans have not come close to saving enough to maintain their standard of living in retirement. All right. And yet they're living longer and they have higher expectations on what they're going to be able to do. And there are certain things like long-term care, which is a lot more than health care, that unless you're poor and eligible for Medicaid is not covered. And therefore you got to cover that. So, you know, the part of the problem that we have, then I'll turn it over to Bill, is there has been a great widening of the gap between the super wealthy and the middle class. And in fact, the middle class is getting squeezed because lower income individuals are eligible for lots of government programs, many of which are tax-free. The super rich, they don't have a problem. Okay? So what happens is the middle class is getting squeezed. But Bill, you've written a lot on this kind of stuff. It's financial literacy. We do a terrible job.
Can I quickly ask you, David and William, what do you consider to be the super rich? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about the billionaire class? Are we talking about someone with 5 million? Are we talking about someone with 50 million? Or what are we talking about?
I don't know. A hell of a lot more than I've got. Okay, I mean, Bill may have some comments here.
Yeah, I mean, look, worldwide, there's less than 2,000 billionaires. Okay, and to get into the, to be a 1%er in the United States, at least a couple of years ago, I don't have the current with all this turmoil, but $11 million made you a 1%er. $11 million net worth made you a 1%er in the United States. So yeah, 5 million's a lot. 10 million is good. There are some financial houses that look at only 35 million and above to be their client. So, you don't have to be that billionaire to be an attractive candidate to these investors. But to David's point about getting squeezed on the bottom, and especially now, it makes it more unaffordable to own a house with the mortgage rates as they are. There is a problem in the middle class. There really is. And I agree with what Mark has pointed out, that, the legacy of having the family house, having some property in your net worth. I mean, that's certainly wonderful. But one of the things that we've discovered, and especially if it's highlighted in The Millionaire Next Door, is this issue. What happens when you just give an inheritance to the next generation? It deadens their senses, easy come, easy go. We show in all the categories from clothing to housing to artwork to cars. Those who inherit money spend more than those who actually work for a living to make the net worth. So there's a real danger of just giving it away. There has to be, some incentive. And that's one of the things I like about, I know we're talking about the new legislation as well that, Biden just signed. This idea of work requirements, modest work requirements, I think it's about time we got that back in to the mix. Because if it's just given, you're not going to have the incentive to be to go get a job.
I'm really confused by this conversation about, people giving money to their kids. First of all, it shouldn't be up to government what people do with their money. If I work really hard and I want to give it to my kids, I should be able to give them any amount that I want to. Government shouldn't be able to do anything. Now, the logic that I hear, though, for why you guys have those horrible, ridiculous estate and death taxes in the United States is to prevent people from accumulating this wealth and hoarding it. Now I'm being told that actually, if you give it all away, it ruins those young people because they spend it all. So which is it? Are they hoarding the money for intergenerational dynasties, or are they spending it all irresponsibly?
We're
Well,
going to get
surely
into
if they're
that.
spending it all irresponsibly, that's a good thing, right? Because the money's being
We're going to bring
recirculated
in
through the
some.
economy with the free market.
We're going to bring some experts in July to discuss intergenerational transfers. Shaquille, it's different than anybody thinks, really. First of all, the estate tax, they changed it since I started practice back in 1984. You used to pay an estate tax when you had more than $425,000, and then the tax was 55%. Today, because they have a combination unified credit, it's over 23 million. So what they did over the last, several decades, they basically eliminated the federal estate tax for the vast majority of the population in the United States. And
they should eliminate it for the rest of the. They should eliminate it for the rest of the population. It's a disgusting tax.
Because and when they do, they pass laws that index for inflation. At the same time, the minimum wage was never indexed for inflation. Okay, but here's one of the problems. The estate tax could be used to offset the national debt. In other words,
any tax, Nick, any tax. Debt. Nick, what? any tax. You can make that argument for any tax. You could tax how much air somebody breathes and say, well, that's going to pay off the national debt. Estate taxes and death taxes are the most disgusting taxes of all the taxes that exist. The fact that you're going to say to me that I'm going to pay taxes when I earn the money, I'm going to pay taxes when I invest the money, I have to pay a capital gains tax when I get rid of the asset, and now my children are going to pay tax as well. It's disgusting.
Time out. Here's part of the problem, Shaquille. Part of the problem is words matter, right? Good friend of mine is called Frank Luntz. He's probably the best wordsmith you're going to find in politics. All right. He's a friend of mine. Okay.
I just read his book, actually.
He came up with the term, the death tax,
right,
for the estate tax. All right. And you know what I said back to Frank? I said, Frank, I hear what you're saying. It's effective for the argument you want to make. But what about the birth burden? What about the fact that every new child who's born has hundreds of thousands of dollars of accumulated debt that they're going to have to be responsible for? Here's the key. If we were paying our way, Shaquille, if we were paying our way and we weren't accumulating all of this debt, your argument, I think, has great merit. But the fact is, we're not.
We're not.
Dave,
we're not.
Dave, I respect you. I respect you immensely. But if we're going to play reverse word games of the birth burden, that birth burden wasn't just incurred and then spread out across all of the poor kids of America. Those debts were incurred on behalf of everybody, supposedly. So those parents who had those children, okay, they're the ones that are responsible for that, not me and not my kids. The fact is that I've already paid tax on the money. I've had to pay tax all the way through. I've had to pay tax when I've spent the money. I've had to pay tax on property taxes, sales taxes, and everything else.
Is different.
And then when I accumulate assets, you want to tax that as well.
My point is different.
You're dead.
Point is the amount of tax that these people had to pay wasn't enough.
Right.
All right. That's my point. Okay. You did pay tax, but it wasn't nearly enough. Okay.
And the easiest time to collect this when someone dies.
I agree with that.
Change the tax code. What we have is we have a majority of people who do not occupy the ranks of the very rich, who get to vote that, one, we want an increase in government spending, and two, I want somebody else to pay for it. And then someone like Nick comes along, a trust fund baby, and says, oh, I've got to bring out the violins for Shaquille's kids because they're going to have so much more money. No, I'm not paying tax. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to voluntarily give my money away to people that piss it up against the wall.
I didn't know that Nick was a trust fund baby.
Yeah, you do.
Let's don't go there.
Hey, listen, I have a whole different life revolving around trust. Not only being the beneficiary, but also setting up trust for hundreds, if not thousands, of clients, including the family that founded Coca-Cola. They were my clients. The president of Kimberly-Clark was my client. The president of Bausch & Lomb was my client. The founder of Dunkin' Donuts was my client.
Oh, yes, man, there you go.
And they all
Love
had
Milky
trust. And I know because I drafted them. Okay. But not only that, a lot of them also were recipients of trust. It's a whole industry that is heavy in the 4 areas in Florida I worked in: Boca Raton, Palm Beach, Fort Myers, and Naples. I mean, it's the name of the game is intergenerational transfer of wealth. And yes, you have different people. There's some people that really believe like Shaquille does. It's my money and all blah blah blah. And there's some.
You know why I believe it? You know why I believe it's my money? Because
they don't care.
My parents grew up dirt poor on a farm.
Yeah.
We're losing you, man. We're
losing
And works really hard. And I have earned every cent of what I've got. I haven't ripped anybody off. I haven't been a criminal. I haven't done anything like that. I've paid my taxes all the way through my life. And when I go to give that money away to other people in my family, that should be my choice and not somebody else's.
Yeah.
So I believe it's my money because it's mine, because I earned it.
Of course, because you worked for it and you never were part of intergenerational transfer of wealth. Okay, I got it.
But you're not
a worker
either.
But there's a whole class of people out there that aren't like you, Shaquille. I'm just saying it.
So let's
hundreds of thousands, if not millions.
Let's play with your logic for a minute then. So if my parents are both really accomplished athletes or really accomplished musicians or something like that, and they spend a disproportionate amount of time with me teaching me how to play musical instruments, or they spend a lot of time with me encouraging me to pursue athletics, which gives me an advantage over every other kid. What we should do is we should say, you know what, to those parents, we should say, you know what, you're not allowed to do that. What we want you to do is we want you to teach your kids, but we also are going to require you to teach everyone else's kids as well for free, because we don't want someone else's kids to have an advantage or for your kids to have an advantage over them. It's ridiculous.
That's
ridiculous. It's a disgusting tax, and I'm never, ever going to change my mind about that. Death taxes are disgusting.
I totally understand the very selfish argument. Okay. But at the same time, since we live in a country, and this is what a lot of the wealthy people, someday I'll take you around these areas, you'll meet really rich people. They actually believe that they should pay some amount in estate taxes and contribute back to the country that actually helped them.
Nick, nothing is stopping them.
The wealth that they've achieved. One guy told me he was worth about 20 million. He goes, okay, so I got to pay 10 million estate taxes. So what? Because my kids get 5 million each when I kick the bucket. What's wrong with that? And what am I supposed to do?
The fact that he doesn't care enough about his kids doesn't mean that I shouldn't care enough about mine. If he wants to pay the tax, he can do so.
Most wealthy people don't want to give their kids too much money because, Bill, let me come back to you.
That's true.
What about the history of people that are super wealthy, okay, giving money to the kids and the kids being blown, or businesses, that they've done sweat equity to build, and then they inherit it, the kids inherit it, the grandkids. My understanding is a very high percentage of those go bust.
Yeah. That's right. They dissipate
you're dominating the conversation. You need to back off a little bit. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. No, David, you're absolutely right. Just look at the longevity of small businesses as well. The original founder would love to have their children inherit the business, but they don't often have the motivation to carry on the business.
Right.
You have the opportunity that you find one of your siblings or one of your children who can actually do it. What is the probability that their child is going to want to do it? To bring generation after generation into the family business is really unlikely. The data shows that from the Small Business Administration. It's very hard to do. And likewise, when you give unbridled wealth to the next generation, they'll say, wow, this is great. My lifestyle can now expand and I don't have to worry about replenishing anything unless I have that same attitude. I want to be a good steward and then have it for their children and grandchildren. But what is the probability of that happening? Money can be very elusive.
Should there not be a personal choice?
No, but Bill and Lee, along those same lines, and I'd love to hear Bill's thoughts about this, because I know that I had a friend of mine that actually did a article, I think it was an artwork kind of display around Wilmington, which is down there in the coast, and a number of folks there were definitely making some money over some very hard labor, that being the fisherman kind of work and everything. Not saying that they were all millionaires, but there were a few that made some good money in that space. But a lot of their kids did not want to go into that kind of work because it is not a glamorous work. And we can say the same thing about tobacco farmers. And we know that there have been some historical people that made money off of tobacco and cotton and things like that. And that's not glamour work either. So I think that some of the younger folks are looking at some of the ways that their parents lived, whether they made a decent living or whether they made wealth, and are like, I don't want to do that kind of work. That's too hard and everything. So I just wonder your thoughts about that, because that is something that I have seen. That some folks are like, look, I saw what my parents did in order to get their wealth, and I'm not trying to do that. I want to go become a celebrity or whatever.
And one of the ironies, you look at these blue collar millionaires who really had a tough time making the money, but did make the money. What do they tell their children? Look, I had a pretty tough life. I want you to go to a college, an expensive college. I want you to hang out with rich kids who are going to be at the same college. And what has the parent just done? Said, look, I know what I had to do to make the money, but that was hard work. I want my kids to have it easier. And what you've just given them is the death sentence. And stripped out their motivation.
Yeah.
So we bring it on ourselves.
Are we not assuming that the parents have any obligation to bring these kids up with values, work ethics?
Well, they do, but it varies from a case by case basis. Lee. In other words, unfortunately, all the kids are different. And so the thing is, some of them would do what Bill says, and some of them will actually pursue other things and be very successful. But in terms of the federal estate tax, which I didn't know Dave Walker knew the guy who transferred it to the death tax. That was my business for 17 years. And, I got out of it because they eliminated it in the year 2001. I'm going, I had all those clients I discussed. They all called me and said, basically, you're fired. I said, why? Well, there's no estate tax. Okay. So Bill Rosenberg, who founded Dunkin' Donuts, he's gone. Coca-Cola, they're all gone because there was no death tax to do any planning around. And the sad part is it wasn't like our national debt expanded. And the thing is, nobody did anything about it. In other words, it's not like the revenues from the state taxes dropped next to nothing. And it could be earmarked. It's not as big as people think. It's pretty small. It's about 78. Back when I was practicing, 78 billion a year. Wasn't that big, but it could be earmarked to start reducing the estate tax along with controlling government spending. Because the sad part, 70, 80 billion just doesn't cut it today. But you need everything that you can get to reduce this.
When your deficits are 1.4 trillion plus, it's immaterial.
Yeah, it's a material, but that's the problem, David, is that, and that's the reason we really need a fiscal responsibility commission, because we are so far upside down, we don't even know how far upside down we are. It's really, the way I look at it, it's really super bad. And I haven't talked to a lot of my clients because I now deal in pensions, which are really middle-class people making $500,000 to $1.5 million a year. They're not the wealthy people that make a lot more than that, not doing anything. But I'm wondering how many are looking for the exit strategy, which is not to base their kids in the United States of America.
Now, Nick, hold on. Did I understand correctly? You're saying that the people that are making $500,000 to $1.5 million a year, they're middle class?
Yeah, aren't they?
No, I don't think.
Okay. Well, relative to the people that I used to work with,
they may not be. And in fact, if they're making that much money, they're definitely a 1%er based on the stats that we have before.
Well, the thing is, relative to the people I used to hang with.
I see.
Okay, in other words, I couldn't talk to the President Kimberly Clark and all these people, and President Balshalom and the founders of Coca-Cola. The founding family of Coca-Cola was very interesting because the kids would tell me, "Hey, Nick, never worked." He was like in his 40s, 50s, never worked a day in my life. I said, "Why not?" Well, Coke stock, gift that keeps on giving. And, and so a lot of them, they don't ever work, but they live in very nice homes. They have
but the question is, what did they do with their time? Right.
Oh, what he did with his time, he had a boat. He went sailing in Florida all the time and took some friends out. And then he had his private airplane that he flew around.
So he did little to nothing for society.
No, they don't do anything for society. What'd you say,
I
David?
recently learned a new word in French, flaneur. Flaneur.
What? Do something for society? I think
Flaneur. It's the
that wasn't in the
What does that word mean?
What does that mean,
It
Bill?
means the idle rich.
yeah, you could say it
Flaneur.
was idle, you know. But then for every one of him, there was some of them that actually did get jobs where they would work in companies and stuff like that. So, you know, not everybody was the same. And
Well, I will tell you that one of my prior bosses was
Yeah.
Peter G. Peterson, who was former Secretary of Commerce during Nixon, who was one of the founders of the Blackstone Group, private equity.
Yeah, from Blackstone. Sure.
And he and Warren Buffett and a number of other billionaires. I mean, Pete became a billionaire when Blackstone went public, although, you know, I think he was worth 2 or 3 billion. Okay. Well, not billions. Okay. He and a number of other people, including Warren Buffett, pledged to give half of their wealth to various charities.
Yeah.
As a legacy to try to be able to make a difference, if you will. Okay. Shaquille, welcome back. To try to be able to make a difference. That left plenty of money to give their kids.
That's right.
Right. In fact, one of the things that I remember from Pete that stuck with me all along is you have to know the meaning of the word enough. Once you have enough, you need to start focusing on others. And once you give your kids enough, you don't want to give them so much that they can't do that they don't have to do anything. You want to give them enough where they have an opportunity to do a variety of things that they want to do, but you don't want to give them so much that they don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the word Bill came up with in French.
Yeah. Right. Flaneur. Yeah, David, that's exactly a quote from Warren Buffett about children.
Yeah.
Give your kids enough so that they can do anything, but not so much they can do nothing.
It's a very subjective term, though.
I think he's right on. Shaquille, you have any comment on that?
I do. Sorry, what happened? Because I've changed rooms and my internet disconnected, so that's why I dropped off. So sorry about that. It wasn't because you told me off. Look, I do have a couple of comments. I agree with this notion that if you give kids too much money, it can ruin them. I agree with that. I've got very, very wealthy clients, although I'm not quite in their level of wealth. It's something that concerns me. You know, I try to look after my nieces and my nephews, and I think, well, you know, if I give them too much, if I take away, you know, the pressures that I felt, you know, will that retard their work ethic? I get it. I understand that. But if I choose to, I shouldn't feel pressured by other billionaires or other multimillionaires to give more of my money away. It's not up to them. And I think that doing it through taxes, you know, again, I think that when you are talking about taxing money that has already been taxed, I think that is an incredibly unfair thing to do. And even the way that it's being done in the United States, you have a step up in basis for asset transfers, but a direct tax on cash transfers. This just makes absolutely no sense. You're actually making it easier for existing old money to be passed through generations and harder for new money to be passed through generations. So that's what I'm saying. It's an unfair tax, and you know, just tax differently. Bill Gates says that what he thinks we should have in the United States and around the world is a progressive consumption tax.
I agree.
Most wealthy people support that. Most economists support that. You support that, Dave. David K. Johnson supports that. When was the last time we heard any talk about that? You know, that has no political traction whatsoever. So you have a situation in the United States where you've got the most progressive rates of tax in the industrialized world, okay? You've got the rich that are unhappy because they feel like they're being taxed too highly on their marginal rates of tax. You've got the poor that are unhappy because they think the rich aren't paying enough. And then the solution is let's create wealth taxes and death tax and increase death taxes. It's not working. This is not a solution.
Well, the middle class is the one that gets squeezed with the current.
That's true.
Secondly, you know, our tax system has got to be fundamentally re-engineered. Okay, I mean it is not generating adequate revenues as a percentage of GDP. The gaps, the haves and the have-nots have grown dramatically. They're continuing to grow. That's a domestic tranquility problem.
Yeah.
Speaking of tranquility and everything, just really quickly, what is because there's a term that people use oftentimes, and I know that it is used even now. But how much is the issue? And I'd love to hear both Dave and Bill's talks about this. We still have a lot of folks in the middle class that are loving to keeping up with the Joneses, meaning that if they see the person with the new hot car, or they see the person with the Oculus set, or they see the person with whatever is the hot trend. I mean, we even see that with one of the most powerful computers of all time, the phone. How many people are rushing out to get the latest version of the iPhone or whatever other kind of things that are out there? So I was wondering, how much is that hurting the middle class, this notion that we've got to keep up with the Joneses, whatever the Joneses are doing tomorrow?
They need to read this book, The Millionaire Next Door, which basically says, if you want to be rich, don't keep up with the Joneses. But I have another story about a wealthy person. When I went to University of Miami Law School, one of my classmates was Stuart Miller. His dad was Leonard Miller, who founded the Leonard Corporation, which is a big home builder in Florida. They may build outside. Now, Stuart went to Harvard undergraduate, Miami Law, but he's always prone to be the president of the Leonard Corp, which he is today. And of course, he became president of Leonard Corp. But there was a person who was his son. His dad founded the company. He continued on the Leonard Corp. He actually donated $100 million to the University of Miami and another $100 million. But part of these donations that everybody thinks, oh, wow, Bill Gates is so generous, Bill Buffett's so generous, is because of the federal estate tax. I can tell you that. The federal estate tax, back then at 55%, they start thinking, maybe I should do something different. And then they create the private foundation. I know because I've done this for these people. And the private foundation gives them more and their kids more control, as opposed to 55% flushed down the toilet, in their opinion, because it goes to crazy government spending. If you actually had rational
let me ask you a question.
These people would not mind as much to pay the federal estate tax. The problem is, it's the government spending is the real thing that gets them in terms of paying this federal estate tax. But yeah, go on, Chico.
Let me ask you a question. Why is it that countries, the majority of the world, the majority of Europe, Australia, Canada, although they lie about it, but theoretically Canada, the majority of the world has gotten rid of death taxes, and yet they haven't had a decrease in government income. So if this idea that you guys have in America is such a great idea, why don't you promote the idea internationally? Why isn't the United States running around the world? You guys are talking about global minimum tax, a global minimum tax. Why don't you go around the world and say, hey, listen, everybody, that's what you need to introduce?
Because our problem is really very simple, and you may not understand it, but the wealth is concentrated very heavily in a very small group of people. Like I said, I'll give you a tour of Naples, Palm Beach. Yeah, I've been up and down there before Donald Trump even had a house at the Mar-a-Lago. Well, that was a place we were thinking about buying, but we ended up in St. Andrews Country Club in Boca. Okay, but the thing is, all these places, the wealth is skewed very much toward the top end, where they have all the bananas and everybody else has peanuts. I mean, that's just the nature of the game. And we have a huge national debt. A solution would be to go back to the old estate tax and start diverting assets over to cover this national debt. Granted, it's only $70 billion to start with, but could increase over a period of time. However, at the same time, you're going to have to work on the spending side. You're going to need both sides to win. And then the economy could recover. Spain and Greece have the same problem, a high GDP ratio to their debt. We have a real problem and we need to solve it. And you're not going to solve it by saying beneficiaries like myself. And by the way, I wasn't a trust baby. I started off as an entail baby, something you wouldn't even understand. But that's because in the 1944 will that my grandfather Vandermark set up on the Bank One shares that became Chase was an entail. That's what you used prior to trust. Then it became a trust because trusts are more efficient than doing entails. All right. Now, then beneficiaries like myself would actually have to pay taxes rather than getting a free ride in life. What's wrong with that, Shaquille? Okay, there's nothing
because somebody else somebody else has already earned the money.
Shaquille and Nick,
because you are I'll tell you what's wrong with it. I'll tell you what's wrong with it. Because you are taxing money that has already been taxed. But they've already paid tax on this money. It wasn't earned in a tax-free environment and then handed down. That's what's wrong with it. And you talk about You talk about the concentration of wealth and the wealth, and the wealth gap. If you look at the Forbes 100 list, the vast majority of people on that list are either people that self-made it, or they're within a couple of generations of the people that made it. Okay, if you have a look at the poor, you guys are importing immigrants from poorer countries all the time, and then you talk about the difference between somebody who just arrived in the country and somebody who's maybe been there for a couple of generations, and the wealth, of course, is a wealth.
Hey, time out.
First, let me say a couple things because we're coming near the end. All right. First, Shaquille, you say they pay tax on it. That is true. They didn't pay enough tax on it.
That's right. They didn't.
All right. That's the point. All right. Just because you pay tax doesn't mean you've done your fair share. All right. Secondly, I personally believe that the most efficient way to tax is a progressive consumption tax, because wealthy people tend to spend a lot more, with a refundable tax credit at the poverty level, so that people that are at the poverty level or below don't end up paying it. Okay. But people that are above the poverty level do, and the more you end up spending, the more you pay. If you dramatically change the tax code, okay, then we wouldn't be having to have this debate, all right? But the way that my frustration right now is that we have huge debt to GDP going up rapidly. Mm-hmm. The problem is primarily a spending problem, but not exclusively. And yes, people are paying taxes, but that doesn't mean they're paying enough. I'll leave it at that.
Hey, really quickly, we did have one other guest that is not
spoken yet. Can I just ask you a question back to that, Dave?
No, can we hear from Kim? Because we haven't heard from Kim at all. And Kim has been sitting there, and I didn't know she had some things to say. So let's at least give respect to one of the other founders and see if Kim's got some things to say as well. You're on mute, Kim.
You're muted, Kim.
You're on now.
You're muted.
You're muted.
You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
We
can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
We need to learn how to read lips.
While she comes back on, can I just ask you a question, Dave? If you believe that they pay tax but they didn't pay enough, if that's the story, then why does the estate tax only kick in after a certain level? Shouldn't everybody be paying for it? Why are we only going to tax the rich? They've paid their taxes according to the levels that were set. They've then invested the money. Now they're being asked to pay tax again.
We're not just taxing.
Why not broaden the spectrum and apply that to everybody?
Kim just had a point.
I think there's a reasonable level of accumulation where you shouldn't have to pay tax. Okay, a reasonable level of accumulation. The other thing is you have a lot of people who have like family farms and things of this nature, you know, and in order to be able to pay the tax, you have to dispose of certain assets, you know, businesses or whatever else in order to be able to do it. So I think some reasonable level of exemption, and we can debate what that is okay. But Kim, go ahead.
No, it's time to wrap up. I just wanted to thank everyone for this beautiful conversation, because our tax situation is a problem. I agree with the progressive tax, the progressive consumption taxing, because I think it will help put more money into circulation as well. So, but thank you. And I know we got to wrap up, but what a great conversation. And I look forward to it next week as well.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you.
Y'all have a good day.
All right.
Hi, I'm Nathan Osmond, singer, songwriter, motivational speaker, and even mortgage loan officer. I've known Dr. Bill Danko for over 20 years, and we've shared the stage at many great financial conferences the world over. Just recently, Dr. Bill Danko did a great Zoom call for my sales associates and shared some great principles from his New York Times longest best-selling list, The Millionaire Next Door, but also what it means to be richer than a millionaire. This is his new book, and I highly recommend it. The entire team at the Elite Team was very appreciative of Dr. Bill Danko's time and his insights, as he's a speaker that speaks with conviction from the heart. In fact, we ordered over 100 different copies of this book to give to our clients and our associates, because we truly believe that by studying this book, it can really help you to get through these turbulent times. This book is solid with research and survey research and empirical evidence that helps you to understand that yes, money is important, but money plus happiness is even better. I highly recommend that you go get a copy of this book today. You won't regret it.